Welcome everyone to another In Focus episode. Today we will be going over our latest article from Boulder Hageraats that you can fully read on our RAIA website, that you can find on the comment section of this video. It is titled The Freedom to Self-Encarcerate. Once you see it, you won't help but notice. An open society is much more fragile than it may seem. In the name of coronavirus, we are currently deeply harming the very fabric of what makes countries have high degrees of well-being, freedom, and resilience. What's more, what occurs is that while we are voluntarily doing this damage to our own society's hard-fought rights and institutions, it is also resulting in millions of direct victims every day. How, you may ask? Well, with coronavirus, the world is not in continuous existential danger. The world is, however, facing an existential danger when it comes to good governance, open society, and individual freedoms. Now, these are scarce. The actions that governments are currently taking across the world will have deeply destructive impact on the resilience, social health, and freedoms that previous generations have fought so hard for. To give out some frame for comparison, coronavirus displays patterns that are very similar to other viruses, even if there are differences in number of victims. Just like the regular flu and many other diseases, we know it mainly targets elderly people or those with compromised immune systems. Therefore, just like the flu and all other diseases and health challenges we face, there is no evidence that coronavirus is an existential threat to our world. The fact that, yes, it is currently causing overwhelmed intensive care units is, of course, a serious problem, but that does not change general observations about data. Every year, roughly 100 million people die. Coronavirus does not radically change this number. Every day, the media provides us with hysteric updates on coronavirus victims and the projected victims coming along. However, there is little to no attention being paid to the millions of victims our overreaction is causing right here, right now. There are many vulnerable groups that are now pushed off a cliff no one seems to be particularly concerned about. Right now, especially in the developing world, millions of people are facing direct starvation, extreme poverty, and/or deep social deprivation. And these people are often from already marginalized and vulnerable communities. Many have already lost access to basic medical facilities, essential medicine, and other such necessities. The difficulties will not really be now, but yes, in the coming months, when the full scale of the economic damage becomes apparent. This will only get worse. Beyond the short-term destruction we are wrecking on the most vulnerable of our global society, the other damage inflicted right now is perhaps less visible, but just as potentially harmful. Do you realize? Liberal, free, open societies are under threat in a way that we have not seen since the darkest days of the 20th century. Many of the laws and measures created during the War on Terror have never been reversed. Governments just tend to hold onto power whenever they can, given their short-term thinking nature. We cannot blame them for that. There is no conspiracy behind this, it is simply the way human systems function. The corona crisis has led to governmental powers unheard of in modern times, at least in our liberal democracies. Since India joined, billions of people, yes, I said billions, are now confined to their homes by governmental decree, with the military patrolling the streets to enforce this. Police can dole out disproportionately heavy punishment without any clarity about the rights of defendants or limits on authority overreach. All of this occurred without any serious democratic or social debate. Most of society seemed to vaguely agree that yes, it was necessary and therefore it simply happened. The message: our government can lock us up arbitrarily without due political or legal process. This is neither normal nor in line with fundamental liberal principles we stand by. Governments should only take such measures in the most extreme cases when society's very intrinsic survival is on the line. When? Well, for example, during wartime. That is what emergency laws were made for. But this is not wartime. As just explained, coronavirus is not the case. It is instructive to observe the pattern here, a pattern that has been eerily similar across nations. The fact that the crisis started in China obviously set the tone from the beginning. A totalitarian regime can take much more drastic measures without foregoing any of its foundational principles. But here's the thing. The way democratic countries like Spain within a liberal governance have adopted the same measures as an autocratic regime system is both fascinating and frightening. It is a playbook that we have seen throughout history, with a number of common themes coming together to create just the perfect circumstances for totalitarianism, even if that's not necessarily the original purpose. Now pay attention. Here, I'm going to outline the 10-step guidebook on how unintended authoritarianism usually begins. Try to look out for the patterns. As usual, please remember to subscribe and share the video with your friends if you're liking this content, so that we can continue growing our community. Now to the 10-step guidebook on the beginning of authoritarianism. Step 1. Creation of an enemy. A threat, real or imagined, is blown out of all proportions, respect to what it really is. It leads to a social consensus where other perspectives are no longer allowed. Therefore, that supposed truth is that we are in an existential crisis, in a war against an enemy, and no other measure is acceptable in fighting this threat. All extreme measures are valid. Step 2. Disregard of facts. Hard facts and data or broad scientific consensus that show reality no longer really matter. Society is in a state of fear, transcending rational thought and basic cognitive functions. Society is moving into the realm of blissful panic mode. Step 3. Filtered analysis. Only selective experts rule the policies. Experts, who as a matter of fact say anything in conflict with steps 1 or 2, are right away discarded or simply ridiculed. Step 4. Authority worshipping. Governments are celebrated as the saviors when they accept the dominant narrative. Therefore, they are a beacon of hope in dark times. Step 5. Self-censorship. Funnily enough, society turns on itself. People begin to focus on an anecdotal story about irresponsible behavior and start checking on the behavior of their neighbors. People who are seen to break the new rules get reported. Dissent is simply not accepted. Step 6. Oppressive unity. In parallel to what we've just seen on step 5, society becomes self-congratulatory about all those who follow the new rules and the dominant narrative. People demand solidarity, union, and loyalty, and applaud each other for staying in line. Claims are made about how beautiful it is to see society come together like that. The underlying message is: if you don't fall in line, you're a traitor to the cause. You are fighting against us. Step 7. Hero worshipping. Society rallies behind those on the front lines. And, as seen before, during wartime, this is generally the military. In the case of coronavirus, it is the medical profession. So any suggestions that there are other concerns beyond medical ones are seen as disrespectful to those brave men and women. Step 8. Extreme measures. With society still distrusting itself, it opens the door to authorities to step in. Military lockdown, it begins. Step 9. Illiberalism. Democracy gets suspended. Not necessarily formally or permanently, but there is no significant parliamentary oversight. There is no open discussion about whether the government is taking the right or the wrong approach during this crisis. And finally, step 10. Media complicity. Manufactured consent, as analysed by Herman and Chomsky, has been on full display already. Without any direct conspiracy behind them, media have played their part in reinforcing social consensus. And, meanwhile, ignoring any attempts to provide alternative conversations. Scare story after scare story gets published, with outrageous claims about potential future victims being daily reported. Politicians who don't follow the narrative get mercilessly mocked and scolded. Look, we know that in a few months' time, the curve will have flattened out. The data are clear about limited timeline per country, regardless of the nature of action taken. This has also been the case of past virus outbreaks. We will eventually let children out to play in the park. People will relax. Journalists will start reporting stories in more objective ways again. And then the shock will come. Everyone will notice the great economic and humanitarian damage we have inflicted upon ourselves. Therefore, finally, a wider range of experts will be heard once again, just like we expected from the beginning to happen. So, when this is over, we will look back and begin to question. Parliaments will rediscover their purpose, namely that of holding the governments accountable. National leaders will lose their saviour status and turn human again. However, two things will not happen. Sadly, the victims of our madness will not be compensated, even those who live to see it. And unfortunately, the precedent of authoritarianism will never be erased from history. And alright, now democracies will not become a dictatorship overnight. The fact that Hungary has just done exactly that does not mean that other countries will necessarily follow suit. Its Prime Minister Viktor Orbán had been on a collision course with democracy for much longer than the coronavirus has been with us. As far as we can tell, Emmanuel Macron or Pedro Sánchez do not harbour any such ambitions. But they've certainly taken a step closer. Even France and Spain are on a path that was already visible during the age of the war and terror, and that will now have been stretched even further. It will start with governments facing significant public debt and budget shortfalls because of the financial devastation inflicted these days, right now. Without a magic money tree that we all wish, drastic economic measures will be imposed, further weakening an already vulnerable middle class and tilting the balance against democratic oversight. A weak middle class inevitably leads to democratic fragility. Can we not see this? The dormant virus of governmental control and oppressive social dogma will linger on us. It will make us slightly weaker during the best of times. Then, all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, during another crisis, it will strike again. With our weakened social immune system unable to resist it, it will further lay to rest any dreams of Francis Fukuyama's end of history. The question we ask all of our viewers to think about and take away from this is, when this is all over and we suffer the consequences of today's actions, will we have been proud of the outcome of our behavior, or will we have been regretful for not questioning our actions right now? As usual, please let us know in the comments what your opinion is, and see you in next week's video. Because remember, once you see it, you won't help but notice.